I came here with an express wish to find out more about self-inquiry and your take on it. Having just read the Ramana Maharshi book, Be As You Are, a bit closer, yeah. There were some quite clear instructions on how he taught self-inquiry. Whether it's true or not, I've no idea. But it seemed to be very simple and would take it like to the end of thinking anything related towards a separate I, which they then called self-realization. And including getting rid of the vasanas. So I've been having just read that, and it sort of sounds very exciting. And then coming back to your path, which seems wonderful and complete, and it all makes so much sense. And I'm just wondering, well, is Ramana's old techniques still valid? Have they been superseded with your take on everything? I don't really know how you know far more about it than me. And I wanted to have more information as to how to perhaps to take self-inquiry further, because it's been a relatively new part of my life, having been involved with Course in Miracles most of my life. So this was a new element, and I've found it incredibly helpful, particularly just asking, who am I?
Yeah, okay. So has Ramana Maharshi's technique, if we can call it a technique, or has his method of investigating into the nature of the self been superseded? No, absolutely not. Does my take on self-inquiry differ from Ramana Maharshi's? No, absolutely not. There are not several different takes on self-inquiry. There are not several different versions of self-inquiry. Self-inquiry is something very specific, and there is only one version of it. Now, obviously, everybody speaks of self-inquiry in a slightly different way, presuming that they understand what it is. Even if they're speaking of the same method, if we can call it a method or practice, still, due to the different characters involved, everybody may speak of it slightly differently or in slightly different terms. But what they are speaking of, if they are speaking of what Ramana Maharshi understood to be self-inquiry, they are speaking of exactly the same thing. So that's the first thing to say. So the second question is, what is meant by self-inquiry or self-investigation, whether it's spoken of by Ramana Maharshi or myself or Francis or whoever. Self-inquiry is a translation of the term Atma Vichara, which, like all Sanskrit words, the words are layered in their meaning. So Atma Vichara could be translated as self-inquiry, self-investigation, or self-abidance. So let's explore what is meant by self-inquiry. It means, very simply, an inquiry or an investigation into what we call the self. And the common name for our self is I, which is why Ramana Maharshi's famous question for self-inquiry is, who am I? He might just as well have said, what is myself, or who is myself? Now, sometimes people asked Ramana Maharshi, but which self is being inquired into? Do we mean the separate self? Or do we mean the self of infinite awareness? And the answer is that there is only one self. Each of us has the experience of being a single self. And the name we give to that self is I. So whether we consider that I to be a separate self, or an infinite self, or indeed any other kind of self, that is the self we are inquiring into. In other words, whatever we take ourselves to be, we are inquiring into ourself as we experience ourself. So, for most people, their self includes the experience of being aware or awareness, obviously, plus a collection of thoughts, memories, images, feelings, bodily sensations, activities, relationships. So all the thoughts, sensations, perceptions are continually changing and appearing, disappearing. So none of these are essential to what we are. So if we make a deep investigation just into the ordinary self, not some extraordinary consciousness or cosmic self, just the very ordinary self that each of us considers ourselves to be, the ordinary self that each of us calls I, and that each of us has called I all of our lives. If we make an investigation into that self, the self that we believe and feel ourselves to be, and ask ourselves, but what is that self really? Obviously, whatever that self is what I have been all my life. I say, I am awake now. I had a dream last night. I slept deeply last night. So whatever the self that I am obviously remains present throughout the three states of waking, dreaming, and sleeping. Yesterday I referred to myself as I. Last year I referred to myself as I. 10 years ago I referred to myself as I. As a 5-year-old boy I referred to myself as I. In other words, I, myself, has remained continuously present throughout my life. Not some extraordinary self, but just the ordinary self that I am. It has obviously been with me all my life. In fact, not just with me all my life, it has been me all my life. I am the same I now as I was when I was a 5-year-old boy. So what is this same I? What is this element of my experience of myself that has remained continuously present throughout my life, that remains continuously present throughout the three states of waking, dreaming, and sleeping? That is a long version of the question, who am I? Ramana Maharshi was extremely economical with his words. As you've discovered this week, I'm not very economical with my words. Whereas Ramana Maharshi had a single question, who am I? And again, and again, and again, and again, when somebody said, I'm feeling this, I'm thinking this is happening to me, etc., he would just say, but who is the I that you are speaking of? And that's fine. He was extremely precise and economical. I have found numerous ways of asking the same question, depending on the understanding of the person who is seeking to know themselves. So I might say to one person, are you aware? That will take them, the answer to that question is the same answer as the answer to the question, who am I? If we ask, what is the continuous element of my experience? That question will take us to the same place in ourselves as the question, who am I? If we ask the question, what can I be absolutely certain of? and we explore that question, it will take us to the same place that the exploration, who am I, will take us to. So I have, when I say I have evolved, it's not something I've worked out. It's that in the course of conversations with people, this single question, who am I, this investigation into the essence of ourselves, has taken on, has found new forms in response to different questions and different people's understanding. But it's all the same questions. They're all variations of the same sacred question. And another question that I might sometimes use, I would make the observation that everything that we know through the mind and by the mind. And therefore the mind's knowledge of anything is only as good as its knowledge of itself. So what is the essential nature of the mind? It's the same question, but arrived at through a slightly different pathway, a slightly different channel in response to a slightly different situation or question. And the analogy that I use more and more now, because it is such an efficient and accurate analogy, is John Smith and King Lear. That is the best analogy I know for self-inquiry. Because so often people think the separate self is something different from the true self that we hear about, this infinite consciousness. And we hear ideas that you have to get rid of your separate self, you have to annihilate the separate self, or the separate self dissolves. All these ideas, none of which are true. They're all either approximations within the limitations of language to an idea that is true, or they're misunderstandings. They could be either. But in either case, it is, I feel, misleading to speak about the getting rid of the separate self, or the dissolution of the separate self, or the annihilation of the separate self, because all these ideas give credibility to a self other than the true and only self of infinite consciousness, which has to be first annihilated before the true self of consciousness, infinite consciousness, can be known. In other words, it's like suggesting that the I of King Lear is something different from the I of John Smith, and that the I of King Lear first has to be annihilated before the I of John Smith can be realized. But King Lear is simply an imaginary limitation of the only person that there really is, John Smith. So King Lear is not an entity or a self in his own right. He is just a temporary limitation of John Smith. So when King Lear talks about his thoughts and feelings, sensations and perceptions, these are all none of King Lear's thoughts, sensations and perceptions are essential to John Smith. John Smith exists independently of them. But there is one element of King Lear's experience that is in common with John Smith, and that is I. If King Lear were to isolate I from everything else in his life, if he were to isolate I from all his thoughts, feelings, sensations and perceptions, what would the nature of that I be? What would his experience of I all alone be? John Smith. So King Lear doesn't have to get rid of himself. He doesn't have to annihilate himself. King Lear is just a limitation of John Smith. All that is necessary is for all the temporary thoughts, sensations and perceptions that King Lear has to fall away and leave the only element of his experience that cannot disappear, which is his essential I, which is, in the analogy, John Smith. So in other words, it is King Lear that seems to practice self-inquiry, or at least King Lear, the character that believes I am King Lear. It is King Lear that asks, it is King Lear that suffers, and therefore King Lear that practices self-inquiry. John Smith has no need of practicing self-inquiry because he doesn't suffer. No need to go anywhere or do anything for John Smith. King Lear suffers, and therefore it is for King Lear to investigate his own nature. So King Lear practices self-inquiry. King Lear asks the question, who am I? Or what is the essential element of myself? Or what is the essence of my own mind? Any of these questions. And as he does so, he traces his experience back. I'm not my thoughts. My thoughts are not essential to me. My feelings are not essential to me. My activities and relationships are not essential to me. What is essential to me? What is the me that exists all alone, independent of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions? So this is the process that King Lear goes through. But when everything finally leaves him, when he is divested of all these features or characteristics, and the essential me, the essential I remains, that is no longer King Lear, because it no longer has any qualities or features or characteristics. It is the pure I of John Smith. Now, King Lear hasn't been annihilated in order to reveal John Smith. All there is to King Lear is John Smith with an imaginary limitation. So that is why the I is revealed. Remember, reveal from revelare, to lay bare in Latin. It is a laying bare of the essential nature of King Lear, which is John Smith. So self-inquiry is this process, if we can call it a process, through which the essence of our mind, the essence of ourself is laid bare, is revealed underneath or behind all the layers of thoughts with which it seems to be obscured.
That makes all perfect sense. No problem with that at all. The idea of personhood, the mixture of story and my characteristics, etc., and history, so on, they're like an add-on.
Yes.
And people will say, well, that's me. So why would they want to get rid of the me that they know to find the essential me? I mean, when we understand the answer is to find everlasting peace, joy, happiness, and the truth. But the people don't necessarily relate personhood with the suffering.
Yes, and therefore it takes some time for it to become clear to someone that their suffering is not caused by their relationship with their children, with their partner, their problems at work, etc., etc. It takes some time to understand that the essential cause of our suffering is the fact that we have overlooked who or what we essentially are. And with this overlooking of what we essentially are comes the overlooking of the peace and fulfillment that are inherent in it. Now, it's true that most people don't feel that the source of peace and happiness is in the recognition of their essential self or being. Most people feel that the source of peace and happiness is the next object, the next relationship, the next meal, the next non-dual meeting, the next whatever it is. In other words, most people believe that peace and happiness is to be found in the acquisition of some kind of objective experience, however subtle that experience may be. Could be anything from drugs to nirvikalpa samadhi. These are all a range of subtle objects, gross or subtle objects, that people invest, in which people invest their desire for peace and happiness. And most people need to be failed a number of times, over and over again, by objective experience, before they are open to the possibility, either intuitively or at the suggestion of a friend, that the peace and happiness for which they seek doesn't lie in objective experience, but it lies in the knowing of their own being as it truly is. Now, what is it that makes some people open to this understanding as opposed to others who, no matter how much they suffer, are still not open to it? I don't know. Of course, the theory of reincarnation explains this, but for some people, they only have to really suffer once to realize, I have invested my happiness in this object or this relationship, and it's let me down. Every object and relationship, sooner or later, will let me down. Some people only need to taste that failure once or twice, whereas before they are open to this new possibility. Other people suffer bitterly throughout their lives and are not open to this possibility, even when it is made available to them.